Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I'm sitting here on a cold winter day in Wisconsin, and I was going through some YouTube comments, and I got a question from a viewer who wanted to know what my childhood fishing baits were. What were the baits that got me into bass fishing? And I thought that would be a good video to do because I think that the lure choices I have or that I started with are probably really similar with a lot of you and will relate to you. And I think there's probably a lot of viewers out there that are going to look at them and go, those were nowhere near my tackle box when I was a kid. And I don't know if that's just based on, these were the baits that the couple family members that were in my immediate family used. So that's what I used, or if it was more a regional thing. Or maybe it just happens to be those were the big baits when you look back at like the 1980s and early 90s when I was growing up. So let's dive into this. Before I do, I want to remind you guys though that I do lake breakdowns with fishthemoment.com. I've got lakes all over the country that I've really dived into, provide 40 different waypoints based on areas and locations and time of year, and provide you with different techniques to use to fish those locations based on my experience. So it's exactly how I'd go to the lake and break it down. It's a really good way to help you fish some of these lakes. Maybe it's a new lake in your area. Maybe it's a lake you're going to on vacation. So check those out. I'll put the link in the video description. And I've also got a members only portion of this channel. So if you're looking for more content from me, check that out. You can go to my YouTube homepage, click the join button, find out everything you need to about it. But we do additional videos. You can have direct access to me. We have a monthly live stream. Lots of cool stuff, and it is additional content. So check that out as well. And you might learn out a few more things about myself on those videos, like in this case. So let's talk a little bit about my childhood growing up. So I grew up in Chicago, city limits itself, and my fishing experience really came down to taking a vacation for either 1 week or 2 weeks to Hayward, Wisconsin, the Northwoods of Wisconsin. And we went to, for the most part, we went to one or two lakes. It really depended on the resorts if they had availability, or in most cases, the resorts ended up closing. These were all small fishing resorts, 5 or 6 3-season cabins that we'd go to. It would be my family, my aunts and uncles, and my grandparents. So we'd have anywhere from 3 to 4 cabins at these small resorts. We all lived for these vacations. This is all we thought about pretty much all year. From my standpoint, it was you'd get up early and go fishing with dad, and then you'd come back and you'd pretty much swim the middle part of the day away. And then, in the evening, you might go out for a couple hours again. And we were primarily bass fishermen. We did a little bit of muskie fishing, a little bit of crappie fishing, but that was pretty much it. And I gotta say, so like the first big bait in my recollection, the one that we used the most, and this had to do with my grandpa. My grandpa, who had one of the cabins, he threw one bait 90% of the time, and it was a Johnson silver minnow with an Uncle Josh pork frog on the back. This is the jumbo size. It wasn't that size, but this was the color, just their frog color. It's a white belly with green and black spots on it, but the pork frog was a key bait, and that had to do with the lakes that we went to always had giant pad fields. And my grandpa would go out, he would go out pretty much all day long and throw a Johnson silver minnow with a frog. And because of that, that's kind of what we all did. When I say we, my two brothers, my dad, myself, we were Johnson silver minnow, pork frog. It was a great way to fish because they're relatively weedless. At the same time, if you got a bit, because we were fishing them as a topwater bait over the tops of the pads, if you got a bite, it was exciting. It got us hooked. I can't say enough about it. I'm gonna do a video on it probably this upcoming year. I wanted to do one this year, never got around to it, but it's still a great combination. Catches a bunch of fish. As we kind of got older, my dad started to get into the old power bait, the power worm, 7-inch size. Pretty much we threw red shad, motor oil, or tequila sunrise, which is this guy. And I think that just had to do with him starting to read a few fishing magazines like Fishing Facts and In Fisherman, and there was a lot of talk about the power worm. And that kind of took over a little bit in terms of being the secondary bait. So we would throw that silver minnow if we were in the pads. If we were just fishing, more main lake stuff or wood, that's where we'd start to throw a Texas rig. And those two baits caught the majority of our fish for many years. As we progressed a little bit, then we kind of got into the Rapala scene. So, the shallow running fat wrap was a big one. This is one that I've retired. This was probably my first one. I've caught so many big bass and various species, dogfish. You can see the holes on the back. But that bait, the shallow running fat wraps by Rapala were definitely a major player for us. And that turned more into like an evening bait, low light for us. So that was like a topwater bait. And then, for me, I love to throw the little floating Rapala, just floating minnow in various colors. But this little guy, I would put on a spinning reel. Actually, it was a Zebco 33 at that point. I cast it and I would just twitch it on the surface, catch a ton of fish, catch some panfish mixed in. And then I would say in my early teens, we kind of ran into a guy that explained to us offshore fishing, deep weed line fishing, and how the key bait at that point was this guy, the Yamamoto Hula Grub, double tail Hula Grub in the 4 and 5-inch sizes. And this bait is really the one that changed my perspective on fishing. Everything for me was shoreline based at that point. And then we started taking that out, fishing, dragging it on some offshore rock, fishing deep weed lines, which, if you're talking about natural lakes like up here in Wisconsin, weed lines are king. And all of a sudden at that point, it was like success started going up. And then you start recognizing that, oh, that point in that weed line or that little indent in the weed line, or, there's a really steep drop off where the weeds just come to an abrupt end. That's really where I started to break down the idea that, oh, fishing is much more than just kind of luck, a lot more than going down just a stretch of bank and randomly running into fish. It's much more spot specific. And that bait in itself opened up a whole new world to me. So I give the Hula Grub a ton of credit in terms of just me from a developmental state. It really changed the game for myself. But those are the baits, guys. Those really are very, very much the baits. I could give an honorable mention to a lazy Ike. We used to fish a lazy Ike, not like probably the way it should have been. We would twitch it on the surface, retrieve it a little bit, twitch it again. So not fish it necessarily on the straight retrieve, but that was another one that we fished quite a bit. But those were the baits. Once I got to this, and I was probably, I'm going to say 14, 15, or 16, this was, these were the primary baits. But then I started to really get more into the tournament aspect. Not that I fished tournaments, but I really started to think more like a tournament angler and experiment with a lot of different baits. Kind of jigs started coming into play, crankbaits started coming into play, more top waters, spinner baits, things like that really started to click for me. But those were the baits. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What are the couple of primary baits that you started fishing with when you were younger? I feel like for me, it's a little bit different. When I take my kids fishing now, and I know they're getting to start in like a master class, right? They're not just out there kind of like we were randomly choosing areas. They're much more, I'm putting them in specific places, but these are not the baits I would start them on. I'm starting them with hover rigs, and I'm starting them with little swim baits and things that generate a lot more strikes and are generally more weedless than a lot of this stuff. But that could just be more techniques have really evolved and are different in today's day and age. But I'd love to hear, what did you guys start out fishing? Were these some of them, or were they completely different? Anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's video, a little bit more about myself. And if you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. We'll have a new video coming out tomorrow.